Today, we're running through quarterback tiers updated for this fantastically exciting 26 fantasy football season. QBs are a incredibly important position to build your roster around, especially in Superflex, Dynasty fantasy football. So, always exciting to talk how the landscape is changing. Pretty surprising for me that our tiers have changed a little bit at the top. And I think it's going to be pretty interesting to talk about that. JP will disassociate from David and my name within the first 5 minutes of the show. So, normal day in paradise here. David and I have a bet we're going to put on the show later for charity as well. So, just lots of arguments about how to organize these tiers. So, that's a lot of fun. I love doing tiers. What was your guys' favorite part about just our tier conversations that we had and just this process of organizing everyone into these ranks?
Justin, I always enjoy arguing with you, and I thought we had a pretty fun one. We'll get to that here on the back half of the show for sure, but it was a fun little debate, and you just kept telling me my guy sucked, and so I called you out, told you to make a case, and here we are with a little bet for charity. That'll be a lot of fun to go over and do a little bit of good for our little rivalry here.
Yeah, the player that has not been mentioned yet, it's one of my favorite points to just watch you two debate that player whenever we discuss the quarterback tiers. Because I'm just like, I know who's going to be on what side, and it's just going to be sometimes a little bit of hate and shade thrown. Not sometimes, always. It's a fun time to sort through these.
All right, so we're going to be moving into tiers. I believe all of our scoring that we have is based off of 6 points per passing touchdown.
Yeah, it's just the Dyno Con League scoring.
So for what it's worth, our tiers are also going to be based off of that scoring, that 6 points per passing touchdown. I'm not even sure that there's a single situation where that really changes the way that I tier people together. I'm curious, does 4 versus 6 point really change your tiers, or just maybe where you're drafting quarterbacks within a tier of players, maybe in a startup, and how you value that position comparably?
I don't think it affects me a lot. There's sometimes like when we're discussing where to end and begin our tiers, like I might push up like a Joe Burrow just a little bit, whereas if I see him at the end of one tier in 6 point, maybe he goes down just one tier if it's 4 point, just because he's somebody who's just very much of a statue. So it's more so just the guys that are on the extreme, just if they're on the edge of a tier, but otherwise it doesn't affect me a whole lot.
Yeah, this probably isn't great advice necessarily, but I have a 50-50 chance of guessing whether any given league is 4 point or 6 point. And that's because I just don't know. I don't pay attention. Whatever. Yeah, it matters to a point, but it doesn't really change my process. You should probably pay more attention than I do, though.
I pay attention in startups, but after that point, I don't necessarily really pay attention, is kind of how I would say. I have 18 leagues. I can't necessarily tell you which ones are which. I might know for a couple, but I might be wrong about a couple too. So that said, we're going to hop into our split screen and go right into our tiers. We have a one-man tier one, which this is the first time we've had a one-man tier one in my recollection. I think we've always had 2 or 3 people up here. So first of all, that makes it for just a little interesting difference, right? So moving into this, we have a one-man tier one, and that one-man tier one is going to be Josh Allen. And we had a long conversation about whether or not to include anybody else here. And when we go to his points per game here on the screen, we're going to see a tremendous 24.4 fantasy points per game last year. He was the QB2 in points per game, QB1 in total points, but he's always around there, right? He's always between 23 and 27 points per game, right? If not even more game breaking than that. He's truly elite. He's truly always here. The age of 30 is a little bit scary, right? But David, you draft him more than anyone. You have more of him than JP or I. So give us just your spiel and why it's clear for you that at this point, he's still alone.
Look, probably the reason I have more rostership is because I lucked into more 101s and startups. And I don't even know if you want to say luck. That's not always the best place to be. But also, I guess I do stand pat there and take him more often, maybe. Either way, this is a weird time in the quarterback landscape. We've got a lot of these guys getting older. Like, Lamar's not quite as consistent as Allen, which was a big part of my case for why I didn't have Lamar in here. But he's I think he's 30 now too. If not, he's about to be. And then we've got these young guys, Caleb, Drake May, Jaden Daniels. There's a few other young guys. We've really only seen one really good season from these players. And I don't know. If I've only seen it one season, I can't put it up against Josh Allen, who's been QB1 or 2 for, 5-6 years in a row. So, like, I don't expect this to stay like this, maybe even before the end of the year, certainly by next offseason. But for right now, there's not a player in fantasy I prefer over Josh Allen in Dynasty Superflex, at least.
I think that's fair. And I was pushing to have a larger tier one. I think part of it is just due to the fact that I'm a little bit more aggressive and just projecting some young guys, maybe potential fall off from Allen, which it's undeniable that he's been the most consistent fantasy quarterback for the last 3, 4, maybe 5 years. I just worry a little bit that it has been propped up a lot by rushing touchdowns. The last 3 years rushing totals for the touchdowns, it was 14 last year, 12 in 2024, and 15 in 2023. So they don't use James Cook a whole lot at the goal line. And it's because Josh Allen is really good there. But my concern is just, hey, this guy's 30 years old. He's the most valuable asset potentially in the entire league. So at what point are they going to stop using him as that goal line guy? And if he falls down to 7 rushing touchdowns, which is still probably a top 8 number at the quarterback position, top 10, then he's still going to lose 2 or 3 fantasy points per game. Now, maybe he makes it up a little bit through the air. We'll see. But just given the age, I don't know. Like, obviously, I love him, but I think that there's a potential small fall off if we do see that happen at some point, because he's got to protect himself. He's just really good. But I do have him as my QB1, though. I will say that. I don't know. Sometimes I do go back and forth between the younger guy that we're going to talk later, but for security reasons, you got to have him in redraft dynasty. During the point scoring season, you probably got to have him as your QB1.
Yeah, especially as we're moving into point scoring season. I think had we done this tier series 4 months ago with no other information really changing, let's say we did it after the AJ Brown trade. It's still far enough removed from the season that maybe I value the youth and upside more, but I do think maybe there's a little bit of a mindset shift. And when we're moving on to our next graphic here and we're talking about the prices that we have, we're talking about 4+ firsts. We're talking about Bijan Robinson, Chase, Bowers as pivots, and we want a plus. Typically, if we're going to any of those guys, we were going to look for a plus. It might be hard to get a plus to go to Robinson or Chase, honestly. You might all just end up sticking with the elite guy that you have, but it's just you're moving him for a haul, right? You're moving him for Tedera McMullen, T-Mac, which is 2 firsts roughly, and 2 additional firsts, right? That's the package you're looking for him. David always says for this, you're not looking for 4 firsts, you're looking for 4 firsts worth of value. 4 liquid firsts for Josh Allen is a break glass in case of emergency. You need to totally nuclear rebuild your team. We don't recommend 4+ firsts for any of these players. When we say 3+ firsts, 2+ firsts, necessarily, we're not saying you need firsts. But a lot of the time, we actually prefer some players and some firsts to hedge. Let's talk more about Allen in the context of tier 2. JP, you argued for some of these guys to. What all did you argue here? First of all, tell us who's here and give us your proposal on how you would break down these tiers differently, because this is how David and I have the tiers. So democracy, it worked.
Yeah, I might make it all one tier, just combining them all. I think I might push down Jaden Daniels just a little bit because he's a little older. He's coming off the trajectory right now isn't as up as it is for Drake May. But Drake May, I think that he does have an argument to be the QB1 in Dynasty, especially if we start to see him maintain what he did last year. Then I think he's gonna jump Josh Allen if he maintains what he did last year. And I do think that there is some potential regression that's projected for the Patriots, which I think is very fair. They had an easier schedule. He was hitting on all cylinders, but this is still someone who's 23 years old. He led the entire NFL in scrambles, so that's a big part of the fantasy production right there. And also, his ADOT was 9.5, third highest in the league. He's very aggressive down the field, and he runs the ball. Now, like I said, there could be regression, but I think that could be staved off with now a better receiving core. I think the offensive line, they added Elijah Vera-Tucker, who is a very good guard. He just has had trouble staying healthy. If he stays healthy, though, and moving Jared Wilson from guard to center, like if the offensive line improves and the receiving core, also with A.J. Brown and Romeo Doubs coming in, maybe that regression doesn't come because of that, right? And if he's QB3 in points per game again, somewhere in that range, then I think he's going to be QB1 in Dynasty just in a couple of months from now. And Lamar Jackson, he's just a little bit younger than Josh Allen. I think pretty much the thing for him is just he's not been the Iron Man that Josh Allen has been. Because when Lamar's out there, he's really good. Although at the end of last year when he did come back, I think he was playing injured. didn't look quite as good. You can see that in the points per game, but he's coming off a season, Lamar Jackson, where in this scoring format, he scored 500 fantasy points. It was one of the most historical seasons we've seen. So he's got that. He's probably got the highest upside of any quarterback in all of the fantasy football landscape at 29 years old. So that's why I still like him in the same tier as Josh Allen. I do think that there is a little bit of variable there at offensive coordinator, bringing in Declan Doyle, who is a Ben Johnson disciple, but he's young, and the disciples don't always pan out. Look at Bobby Slowick for the Shanahan tree. Sometimes they do. Look at Liam Cohen from the Sean McVay tree. Sometimes they're big hits, sometimes they're big misses. So I do think that we have to account for that. But Lamar Jackson, even under a poor to average offensive coordinator, I think is still perfectly fine. I don't think he's ever had an awesome offensive coordinator that's lifted him up.
Those are some solid points. I do think all of these guys are phenomenal. I don't know. The number somewhere between a second is probably not enough for me, rebuilds aside, to go from. I could see a world where if I had Josh Allen, I was rebuilding, I might consider taking a second to go to Drake May just to get younger. I don't know that it moves me enough. Any situation that's not a rebuild and I'm not trying to get younger, I need more than that second. But a first seems like too much. I do understand why it's hard putting them in different tiers, because when we're talking about players of this value, seconds, you're talking about seconds. That's not necessarily enough to make the gap between this monumentally valuable players difference. So I do understand from you actually push me to defend myself, keeping these guys in different tiers versus being in one tier. It's hard to do because, yes, I obviously do prefer in a vacuum Josh Allen to anyone else here at this point. But also, I can't say it's by so much that I can justify 100% having in a different tier. So it's an uncomfortable position to justify. But Allen is just so dynamic. David, kind of summarize your thoughts on it a little bit.
Yeah, look, the reality is you're not realistically looking to move up from one of these three, right? Like, why? I think, sure, if you can get it done for a second, going to Allen, especially from Lamar, if you want to stick with one of the younger guys, I get that. But for me, it's just the consistency, and like, I expect the tiers to change here soon. JP made a lot of good points. Allen is getting older. They're probably going to stop using him in the red zone soon. But until I see it, I have no reason to believe he's not going to have another QB 1 or 2 season. Jaden Daniels, his rookie year, he scored over 400 fantasy points in the same scoring format that we're showing Drake May at 413. I just don't see a reason to separate Daniels and May personally, and I think that's the big reason. For me, I'm a little more risk averse at the very top, when we're talking about our elite assets, because taking a hit there is really a good way to kill your roster value. I like taking upside shots when we're talking about guys that don't have a ton of value, like mid to late first value, or certainly after that. But when we're talking about cornerstone pieces, you just can't afford to miss. If you drafted CJ Stroud in the top 3 that year coming off his rookie year, that team's probably really hurting from that, maybe even still hurting from that. So I need to see a little bit more for the consistency. That's the big thing. I kind of think these guys will pass Allen soon, at least one of them. I don't expect it to remain a one-player tier, but at this moment in time, I couldn't make a strong enough case to put anyone in that same group with Allen. But look, here, we'll go to our pricing page. JP, you were talking about, or Justin, you were talking about the price to tier up. I put it in the graphic as a playoff 27 first, and I'll tell you why. A second for these players means absolutely nothing to me in a trade with these players. So I had to make it at least mean something. I'm not putting a first on any of these guys to go get Allen. I'm not saying this is good advice. I'm just saying, if I have Allen and you're coming to me with one of these guys, I'm probably not going to listen for a second, just because I don't care about a second in that situation.
And I'd run to the bank. And I don't think that's getting done, because we have these guys as 4 firsts and we had Allen as 4+ firsts. So it's a steal if you can get it, but that's what I would need to really consider it, honestly, in anything but the wildest of circumstances where I need to rebuild. I can get May in a second and a third or something like that. And it's just,
maybe a 1-2 swap would have been a better thing to put in there, but even that's too rich for my blood. I'm just saying, you're not coming to someone with a second and trying to get Josh Allen. A second's not making a difference in a deal for Josh Allen. It's just not.
100% agree.
Yeah, and we were just talking before the show that there's sometimes you're in leagues where you just flush at quarterback and you really need running back and wide receiver. So this is very real, especially for David right at this moment. Could be looking at Ashton Genty plus. some sort of running back in that tier 1, maybe probably tier 2. And then you got Malik Neighbors plus and Trey McBride plus. So obviously pretty close to the cream of the crop at the other positions, just not the very tippy top unless you get lucky.
And just real quick on those tiers and those positional pivot prices, I think we are still higher than the market on quarterback valuations, and the market's moved away from higher end quarterback valuations. We kind of still have a flag plant there just because if you do build around those truly elite QBs, and I think we need to acknowledge this might be the end of it, it's a difference making thing. I think when we get to tier 3 in a minute, we're going to see some names that I think are still great to build around in some ways, but are also not nearly as safe from value wise. So in other ways aren't as great to build around. Just they're great. They score points and that's cool. So our tier 3 is going to be a smaller one. That tier 3, it's a 3-man one. We have a pretty wide range from could actually go in the first round to is going in the third, all tiered up here together. So that's interesting, but I think we all agree, and that's Jalen Hurts, Caleb Williams, and Joe Burrow. It's a little hard to justify, in my opinion, but I think it's the right call having these 3 guys together. David, do you think it's wild that we have a potential back end of the first rounder with a guy that I've seen go at the 306 and Jalen Hurts in the same tier? Or is that just we're giving people good advice to take advantage of? You probably can get a first and Jalen Hurts for Caleb Williams in some of your leagues, and I would take that.
The direct answer to your question, yes, it's a little wild. I did suggest we put Caleb Williams up a tier, especially when we had Drake May initially in tier 1. I thought he fit in that group, especially where he's going market value wise. I do worry about the upside. It takes a lot to be the kind of quarterback Caleb Williams is and sustain high-end fantasy success. So I understand why we don't have him there. And at the same time, I understand why we have Hurts here, who's going legitimately almost 2 rounds later in ADP, which at this point in a draft is, like Justin said, I mean, probably more than 1 first in value. So I don't think we're saying trade Hurts for Williams straight up. But the benefit of doing a tier list like this is, as you pointed out, Justin, recognizing that, A, we kind of think Caleb Williams is a little overvalued and we think Jalen Hurts is a little undervalued. So there's multiple ways you can take advantage of that, whether you go try to buy Hurts for cheap, try to sell high on Caleb Williams, or combine it like Justin suggested, see if you can get a first and Hurts for Caleb Williams. That's money in the bank right there, if you ask me. That's a great deal.
Yeah, Hurts is definitely just the player in general on the lowest on here. I just think that the other 2 quarterbacks are just better players, but it's undeniable that Hurts is the better fantasy profile just based on the rushing ability. He's somebody that I could see reach that Josh Allen range of 12 rushing touchdowns, 13 rushing touchdowns, and with some decent passing numbers because Devontae Smith's really darn good. Mekhi Lemon, I think, is an awesome prospect. Stowers and Goddard, and there's Raven reviews of Dontavian Wicks. So I think the passing core is still good with a great offensive line. So the ecosystem is still there for him. It's just the worries of like, will there be job security questions at the end of the year if he kind of has a similar kind of passing season? Just last year, he was the third. Of all the quarterbacks, he threw over the middle, the 3rd lowest, and that's kind of been the thing that people point to. And the only 2 below him were J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix. Like these guys are both probably not starters. So that's kind of the concern for him. But maybe the Eagles are thinking, hey, if we get Mekhi Lemon in here, that'll help bring Jalen Hurts along with throwing over the middle a little bit more. So we will have to see. But if he has a strong season, then yeah, this is probably a value.
It's a legitimate case. He could be the QB1 in fantasy football and still have those job security questions you're talking about. They're not mutually exclusive, right? It's risky, right? But where he's going and the fact that I think you could probably take either of these other 2 guys on the board here and you could probably pick up that 27 first going to Hurts to them. And I feel pretty confident saying I think Hurts is going to be valued around where these 2 guys are valued next offseason. I think Hurts is going to have a good fantasy season. The only thing that could potentially go wrong, I think you did outline though, JP, is that job security thing. Joe Burrow, Joe Cool, injury issues. He was emo last year as well. Upset, sad boy era, post some of the stuff. Do we have any issues, concerns about him really? Or the injuries, it's been a bit. I have some shares. I think if I could pivot to Hurts, I might actually try to pivot to Hurts. Honestly, see if I can, something like that. I don't know that there's a lot of other guys I prefer to Burrow to pivot to in the next tier, but are you guys worried at all or not particularly?
Yes, no, maybe. Injuries happen. They've been happening to him a little more than he'd like, but when he plays, he's one of the quarterbacks that sustains success without any rushing, and it's high-end success. He's still got his weapons around him. This price, I'm very much in on Joe Burrow.
Yeah, he's just freaking awesome. Last year, the fourth best big time throw rate and the lowest turnover worthy play rate by a lot. His turnover worthy play rate was less than 1%, and he's got those kind of weapons. It's just so awesome when he is healthy and when you ignore September, because don't forget, he always starts slow. I don't know why, but they always start slow and they catch fire. So if there's a buying window after September, I think you should take that because it's been a pattern.
All right, and we have that cash price, buy low price for Burrow as 3 firsts. Talking about roughly a random 27 firsts to tier up to the guys above. That's interesting. It's hard to commit to that. I think I'd probably be willing to pay a random 27 first if it's not probably super early to get to a little bit more certainty if I have the ammo. But I also see worlds where I'm probably willing to take a random 27 first to get to these guys if I need the ammo. So I think that's an interesting price point.
Considering we have Caleb a little bit lower and market-wise he does belong in tier 2, we discussed that random first price going from 2 to 1 being a little pricey, but probably what you need to do. Are you willing to add a random 27 first to Caleb to get Josh Allen? Because I think that might actually get done.
Oh, yeah. In a heartbeat, honestly.
I think that actually does get done in a lot of situations.
From Burrow to May or Lamar, I might do that. I don't know. It is tough because in season Burrow's probably scoring, but like Lamar's just like difference making, and I could definitely see if you're just trying to get younger too at the quarterback position with Drake May if he's looking good to start the year.
Few positional pivot ideas we have. Somewhere in the range of Jeremiah Love. I don't think you're getting to a Genty type, but the more risky profile here, a Drake London type of player, or Colston Loveland. Honestly, I would love to capitalize on Colston Loveland's rise in value and the surety to try to get something around this range. So I like all those as possible options.
Worth mentioning that these tight end pivots are tight end.
Any tight ends that we're going to have as a positional pivot, we're talking about from a 1.75 tight end premium valuation. So that does change a little bit. And we're getting into, I think, our biggest tier of the day next. That's going to be tier 4. Big one. We got Patrick Mahomes. We have Bo Nix, Jackson Dart, Brock Purdy, Trevor Lawrence, and
Herbert.
And Justin Herbert's fallen a lot. Mahomes has fallen a lot. Trevor Lawrence has fallen and then risen a lot to land here. He's had a career, right? It's been a fun one. So it's a big catch-all tier. My immediate assertions from this are statistically Nix belongs here, probably from what he's done and his age. But Nix and Purdy in some ways seem like Purdy, I disrespect him every year. He belongs here, but he doesn't seem like he necessarily does from a value standpoint. And Nix kind of feels the same way to me too. And Dart feels like the riskiest play in the room. Those are my insights right now.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I'm not the biggest Bo Nix guy, but he's been pretty consistent as a back-end QB1. And maybe I would have pushed back on having him here if they didn't just have Jalen Waddle. I think that's going to help them out a lot. And this offense really could take off with that addition of Jalen Waddle and the best running back in the draft class, Jonah Coleman. Sorry, I forgot Jeremiah Love. But you're right, though, that Brock Purdy, he's just perennially underrated because of the draft status. That's a big part of it. But it's just remarkable that last year they dealt with so many injuries. And no matter who was out there, if it was Jawan Jennings or Kendrick Bourne or whatever, Brock Purdy was still playing at a high level. And I think a lot of that has to do with Kyle Shanahan and having one of the best tight ends in the game, George Kittle. But I will say this year, I do think he could start slow if I'm going to give a little beginning of the season take here, because George Kittle's coming off the Achilles. Mike Evans is currently injured. Ricky Pearsall is out. Deebo Samuel just joined the team. I could definitely see a scenario where Brock Purdy dips down before climbing back up when he gets, hopefully, Mike Evans and George Kittle. This is an old, slow team. But like I said, regardless of what they've had at wide receiver, Brock Purdy has been good. But that's something that's on my radar, that maybe he will have a buying opportunity later because he still is young and he still is Kyle Shanahan.
Yeah, I think Purdy's kind of like the final evolution of the Jared Goff quarterback, right? You don't expect him to be putting up big numbers, and then at the end of the season, you look and you're like, he's quarterback 4 in points per game. I know he missed some time, but he's quarterback 4 in points per game. Especially if he's your quarterback 2, you really can't ask for much more. Now, if he's your quarterback 1, you want a pretty strong quarterback 2 with him, but I love Brock Purdy. I think he absolutely belongs in this tier. Same with Bo Nix. Honestly, JP brought up a lot of good reasons. One, I'm a little surprised he didn't bring up is not only they draft the RB one in the class, but they drafted the tight end one in the class, didn't they? Justin Jolie. No, the Broncos did take a couple of guys we were very high on as a podcast, so we're excited to watch their careers play out. But let's talk about some other guys. There's some other players in this graphic here. One I was very surprised that Patrick Mahomes, quarterback 5, 23.6 points per game. I know the stigma around him is that he's fading and he's not a lead and maybe he's not what he was and the Chiefs offense isn't going to be as good and blah, blah, blah. But there he is, quarterback 5 last year he's going to have roughly the same weapons, except Rice is hopefully going to be healthy for the season. Is this a good buy window for Patrick Mahomes maybe?
I'm going to touch on that briefly here with a couple of points. One point is coming off an ACL, and he was doing some things with his legs last year. There's concern, and we need to see it. So, yes, of course, an injury creates a buy window. However, it's risk, right? You're buying risk.
Who in this tier isn't risky?
I think, yes, like it's plausible that it's a good buy window. But if I had to pick between buying Patrick Mahomes or Purdy, who I think I can probably get a little bit cheaper than I have to buy Mahomes, I'm going to shop for Purdy first. At the same price, Mahomes versus Herbert's an interesting conversation. I think I prefer Mahomes by a little bit. Here's something that was really weird to me. I put this conversation out in the chat when we were talking this tier. Mahomes versus Trevor Lawrence. I had an inbox offer for my Trevor Lawrence for someone's Patrick Mahomes. I couldn't see a world in which I prefer Mahomes because if I'm competing, I think I prefer Lawrence because I know he's starting the year healthy. And if I'm not competing, I think I prefer Lawrence because he's 4 years younger and he just had a career year with a newer offensive system that we like, good weapons, etc. I think Lawrence is a weird riser and might be at the top of this tier, honestly, for me, which is kind of wild to say. Who's at the top of this tier probably changes a little bit day to day. I hovered over accepting Patrick Mahomes for Lawrence just on name value before I had to actually go into my process and really project out like where I think these guys are going, etc. But it's a murky tier. Who actually has the ability to climb? Is it Lawrence, Dart, and Nix? Can anyone else really climb higher than tier 3 at this point?
If Brock Purdy plays 17 games and scores 24 points per game again and we don't move him up at least one tier.
But he's QB 13 on keep, trade, cut. Even though people know what he continually does, you also have to, he'll move up to 3, but can he move above there? I don't think so.
Probably not.
He can move to 2 if tier 1 becomes a mega tier, but he can't move into the top 4, in my opinion.
I wish I could go back in time and see if Tom Brady had this stigma for 4 or 5 years given his draft status. But yeah, I don't think anybody projects him to be a top 5 points per game scorer again. But yeah, if he did, that would be a big time story. But yeah, I think Dart's the most clear, obvious guy that could move up, but also the probably biggest risk of moving down at the same time. Yeah, I think Trevor Lawrence, the reason why you guys say he could be the top of the tier, and I think he's definitely got a debate for it, is because Liam Cohen, he might just have one of those top 5 play callers in the league with an awesome receiver core and is a rusher who flashed down the end of the season. So yeah, if he continues what we saw down the end of the season, then yeah, he could be on fire. I do want to call out Justin Herbert because he's the one guy we have not talked about because he might be the top of the tier for me. I think just we can't forget like how bad the situation was after Joe Alt went down. The sack rate just went through the roof. The ADOT fell from week 8 and before. He had a pressure to sack rate of 25% or higher just twice. And then after that, every single week except for one. So if the offensive line is healthy, which that's a big if for sure, and Mike McDaniel is what we saw he was with Tua to start his career, then this Chargers offense might legitimately be like a top 3 offense, and Herbert might throw for 4,500 pass yards and 40 passing touchdowns. I think that's really very much in the cards because they do have a lot of talent as well. So I don't want to fade him or forget about that he could rise up as well, because I think we all agree that he's arguably a top 5 to top 10 quarterback in the NFL for sure.
I honestly, he's the QB1 in my heart. I love Herbert, love his talent. I've always had him higher than I should. And like I've in previous seasons, I would have probably put him in the same tier as Burrow. pretty confident. I'd have made an argument he should be in tier 3. I need to see a return and a bounce back to what I think we can see. The one thing I have liked from him last year is more rushing. I did see more rushing from him in some game use, more like design look type of plays, as well as more scrambling. And if that carries over and increases, because we got some big dudes. Herbert, Lawrence, they're big dudes, right? If we see them like they're big enough, fast enough that they should be able to hold up, if they rush more, like those two, yeah, they have some ceiling there. So you love that. Moving on to our cash price on this group, it's going to be 2 firsts to 2 plus firsts. Honestly, some dart owners are going to ask you for 3 firsts. Not interested in buying him at that. Not sure you can find a cash price for dart that people are selling for that I'm comfortable buying for, but I think it's a 2.5 firsts to 2 firsts, something like that. Tier up a random 27 first. I'd love to tear down from some of those guys in that tier to a couple guys in here for a first, to be honest. I'd love to just tear down from each tier and collect a first. Can we just do that in principle? Because I do think we still have some good fantasy producers here. And then tying up our positional pivots, you're looking at a James Cook type, George Pickens type, a Tyler Warren type. So positional player that's a hammer, but either older or younger and unproven, right? We're not getting into tier 1, tier 2 players, but we're still getting into some phenomenal. These are round 3-ish of startup guys. David, do you want to go ahead and read tier 5 for us here?
Sure, pretty short one. I got Cam Ward, Dak Prescott, and Fernando Mendoza. The last 2 101 quarterbacks in the NFL draft, and then just all reliable Dak, someone who will always outscore the other quarterbacks around him in value. So if you're competing, great target. Obviously, if you're not competing, you're not trying to pay for those points. But then the other guys, polar opposite of that, a couple of younger players you hope develop that you probably don't want to count on in your lineup this season. I know we kind of like what Tennessee did, but that's still probably not the greatest team. We kind of like what the Raiders did, but that's obviously not the greatest team. I don't know. You guys have a preference between those two? I kind of think Cam Ward's a year ahead in development, so I prefer him slightly. Does that make sense?
I think it's more likely that Cam Ward is startable for our dynasty teams, not only because Mendoza is not expected to start the year, but because I think the receiving options are a little better, as well as the experience already getting the rookie year out of the way. So I think that both those guys are just swinging and like, all right, can I get a guy who goes up a tier or 2 with also the youth that if they do, hey, like I could have a guy for 10 plus years. That's my quarterback answer. Dak Prescott, this is probably more aggressive than most people would go, but he's been just incredibly consistent. In these 7 seasons that he's been fully healthy, 6 of them he's finished as a top 10 quarterback in fantasy. This is totals, not points per game, but just that level of consistency is awesome. Since 2019, here's his quarterback finishes in our scoring format. QB2 in 2019, then 32 because he got injured. 8, then 18 was injured. 3, then 31 injured, and then 6 this last year. So hopefully the every other year trend does not continue. But even those seasons when he was injured, at least 2 of those 3, oh yeah, one of them like 5 games scored 153 points. Like even those seasons where he got hurt, he was playing really well up to that point. I think 2024, looking at, he was the only one that he was underwhelming before injury. So yeah, this guy's just always underrated. He's got probably the best wide receiver duo in the entire league. And I actually think Brian Florino is a good wide receiver 3 with Ferguson there. I think that the coaching change was actually better for him than I expected. The defense, they're trying to improve it, but it was one of the worst in the entire league last year. So maybe they get to average, but it's probably somewhere in that below average to average range. So they're probably going to be slinging the pill a lot. And this is a great example of a guy that is in 6-point passing touchdown leagues. Like I value him here, but I might push him down if it's 4-point. And even the age 33 doesn't bother me that much because his game just is a game that I think translates to playing at least 6 more years or so. But yeah, we love Dak here just for production wise. It's just, he's always there.
Dak is the last person of this. I just laid out right. I'd love to tear down, get a first, tear down, get a first, tear down, get a first. If I could do that from a tier 2 guy to a tier 3 or 4 guy, or from a tier 2 guy to tier 3 or 4 guy, and then tear down from that guy to Dak, and I could pick up 2 firsts and Dak Prescott, like honestly, like Dak is just so undervalued for a contending team. Like he's the contending piece that I want if I am looking for the lowest common denominator outside of going down to a Stafford type. But I feel better about Dak than I do about Stafford just because he's a little bit older. Stafford is a just brilliant guy to have on your competing teams. Back to David's question between Cam Ward and Fernando Mendoza. I'm going to pick Mendoza here. Ward had his ups and downs last year. From the eye test standpoint, he failed the eye test at the beginning of the season, and at the end of the season, he had moments of passing the eye test, but not consistently. I guess I'm worried enough about him that if I had to make a pick in a startup between the two of them, in a vacuum, it's Mendoza for me because I don't think either of them are helping me contend. Honestly, Cam Ward is at best a bye week filler, and I think by bye weeks, Fernando Mendoza is probably also a bye week filler. He's a quarterback who's starting; you can put him in. So I think I lean that way, but it's not with a huge amount of conviction. It's weird having them in here with Dak. I just think that value-wise, we have to acknowledge that they are more valuable than the guys we have after this, even though what are we doing with them starting-wise? And then we're going to move on to tier prices. JP, will you run us through this slide here real quick?
Yeah, so this tier we're calling about one random first, and to tier up, they'll be costing you a random first as well. And if you're looking at positional pivots, we're looking at somebody like Quinshon Judkins at running back, Luther Burden at wide receiver, and Tucker Kraft. All very appealing pivots if you don't need the extra quarterback.
All right, and moving on to tier 6. Glad they're getting smaller or staying smaller right now, these 6-man tiers, but it's going to be Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, Jordan Love, and Tyler Shuck. It's an interesting tier. We got one guy who could ascend quite a bit. Of course, that's Jared Goff. Just kidding. We know who Jared Goff is. We know who Baker Mayfield is. We hope we don't know who Jordan Love is, because if we know who Jordan Love is, he's dropping down. We're hoping that he builds a little bit on what he seems to be doing as a good quarterback, and it translates more to fantasy. But Shuck, the floor, it's not huge. The ceiling, tier 3, honestly. It would take him 2 years to get there, I think, for us to feel confident. But is the ceiling there, David? How high can he go?
Tyler Shuck, probably up another tier or 2.
This year,
really...
yes, but I don't think he can go higher than tier 4 this year. But if he has a QB1 season this year and then he's a top 5 QB this season after that, can he? What can he do?
I don't know if he can do what you just laid out. If he can do that, then sure, yeah, he can move quite high. Anybody that can have QB1 and then top 5 quarterback follow it up is going to be moving up the ranks. I think he's a good player. I was very much out on him as a prospect, and caused me to revisit some of my process even just because we knew he was going to get the opportunity. So why not try to get some flyers on a guy you think is going to start? And it really worked out for him. Really strong second half. We really like what they did this offseason. Unfortunately, Jordan Tyson looks like maybe he's got Christian Watson hamstring conditions. Hopefully they can get that figured out. Looks like they're taking it slow with him, which is good long-term, a little concerning for fantasy for obviously Tyson, but a little bit for Shuck as well. Still going to have Olave, still going to have Juwan Johnson, Travis Etienne. Pretty good team, still a pretty good offense. So I'm interested, but I think I was much more interested before his price leveled out to where it's probably a fair price now.
Let me read some point per game finishes for you. Starting in week 10, looks like that was his second full game as a starter. 22.9, 7.9 down week. But then 21.3, 21.2, 20, 19.1, 25.9, 23.7. I'm just saying that in a rookie year down the stretch, I know teams now have a chance to adjust to him, but that if he seems like he has a game that's kind of built for fantasy, he's mobile enough, right? Just throwing those numbers out there.
Yeah, he does have a fantasy-friendly game. He ran the ball 45 times in half a season, so you put that at 90 over a full year with a really fast-paced offense. I think that's one thing that's really lifting him up is that Kellen Moore, he plays a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, uses a lot of motion, plays at a fast pace. I think that's very much in the benefit to all the Saints players, including Tyler Shuck. So that raises his ceiling, in my opinion, quite a bit. I do think we shouldn't be so surprised that this really old prospect translated pretty quickly. So I do want to see what is the real ceiling, because he didn't turn the ball over a lot, but he also had a pretty lower big time throw rate. But of course, that was his first year. So I'm very interested to see. I think the Saints are everybody's sleeper team this year. It seems like what everybody's talking about. But I would not be surprised at all if he is averaging, 20 points per game. And if he does that and gives us confidence long term and gets a contract, then yeah, he's getting close to Brock Purdy at that point, although he's already the same age as Brock Purdy, but he could reach that ceiling, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big concern with Shuck is he's already the oldest player on this graphic. No, I'm just kidding. He is actually the youngest player on this graphic, but barely. He is 1 year younger than Jordan Love, who's well into his second contract now for the Green Bay Packers. Love's an interesting player. The Packers were second in EPA per pass attempt last year, but their passing offense was like 21st in points. They just couldn't convert when it mattered. Maybe some good health getting Tucker Kraft back. I do think Love has some upside, but I think, like we talked about in our chat, building this tier ranking, this is probably just who Jordan Love is. I think he's probably my favorite player in this as far as upside goes. But look, here we are talking about your down least common denominator, whatever. I don't think you're getting a first for this, but if you can get a first to go from Dak to Jared Goff, of course you're doing that. Jared Goff he's just going to be a back end quarterback one for the rest of his career, it looks like, which who knows, maybe that's 4 years or so. But you're getting that for dirt cheap, man. If you're competing, you get Dak and Goff as your quarterback room. Look, you don't have the long term health that you would love to have, but you've got the points for about as cheap as you can possibly get them. You're still going to have one of the highest scoring quarterback rooms. Pretty difficult to put that together in a reasonable manner. But hey, we're talking about guys that outscore the players around them in value. That's definitely Jared Goff.
Yeah, I think that you definitely can make a case that that a lot of these players belong with Dak. I mean, I just think that the ceiling's a little higher with Dak than it is with Goff. Jordan Love probably is worth more like a random first than a late first that we have here for the cash price, which we'll reveal here soon. But it's just, I think for us, hey, we don't really see much of a ceiling for him because he was so good last year. PFF graded him really highly. A lot of the advanced numbers favor him. He was awesome, but still was not a fantasy difference maker. So he has to have a big time passing touchdown season to be something that's really worth, swinging your roster to even put in your QB2 spot, which he can be your QB2 now, but you're not excited about it.
Packers were last in the league in drives per game, offensive drives per game. Got to pick up that pace of play a little bit, Matt. Please, Matt LaFleur, head coach of the Green Bay Packers. It absolutely is, and I get it. They like the ball control there, but look, you're demanding perfection when I think we were under 10 offensive possessions per game last year. You've got to pretty much score on all of them when you consider at least one or two of those is probably a knee down to end the half or the game or something like that. So pick up that pace of play if we're going to have Jordan Love mean anything in fantasy. And that's kind of out of his hands.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate situation because I do love the player. Just don't love the situation and the floor that I think it kind of builds. And then Baker Mayfield here, just an interesting one, contract situation, right? Like they're at this point, nothing's going to happen. So is what he said, right? We didn't get it done. We're going to wait till the offseason. So he's a 32-year-old quarterback then next offseason and on a new team, potentially. Maybe he comes back here. There's just a lot of risk, right? And some injury issues compiling throughout the course of his career. I think it's like the ballers joke about, he starts the season healthy every year and he's banged up and injured because he's a dog and he needs to learn how to take care of his body so he can stay healthy and actually be playing for our fantasy teams in November, December, etc. But it's the Goff, Baker, Dak, they're all the same guy. Just I think Dak has the same ceiling. I think we pointed that out. It's a fun tier. And that tier we have it worth, I believe it's a late first. And gearing up roughly a second, right? So I think, are you taking a second to go from Dak to Goff? You said a first, you'd of course smash. Of course we could. David, is that intriguing to you?
That depends on the rest of my quarterback room, but I'd be interested in potentially either direction on that one. I think that's about a fair price.
Fair enough. I think I agree. Do I need the flexibility or am I looking to try to tie down a hammer? And then positional pivots somewhere in the range of a Jadarian Price, a Devonta Smith, a Kyle Pitts. Not going to get those guys in every league, right? If the Jadarian Price guy loves him, if the Devonta Smith loves him, take a different name on keep trade cut right in that range. But that's about the range of player that you're angling for in value wise if you need to go cross positional. Moving to our next tier here, I believe we got a big one again, and that's going to be 5 men. I'm going to read off the names and let you guys pick a couple guys you want to talk about. So that's Sam Darnold, CJ Stroud, Daniel Jones, Ty Simpson, and Kyler Murray. David, you can start us off however you'd like.
I'm going to let JP say what he would like about anybody on this list because I know he won't.
No Stroud, JP. Just steal our thunder.
I know he won't pick the two important players, but go ahead and talk about someone else, Justin, or JP, and then Justin and I will have our little fun.
Yeah, sounds good. Ty Simpson is somebody that you got to be pretty excited about if you're a rebuilder specifically, especially because, man, that preseason game, he looked great. He said he's learned a ton from Stafford, and being in the Sean McVay offense and learning that offense and mastering it before you could really, be the guy there with Puka Nacua too. Like, I think he's in a really good situation. Probably not the highest ceiling, but there's enough rushing juice to at least make him potentially be like a back end QB1 with a high flying offense. Sam Darnold, I think the problem for him last year was just that they did not throw the ball a lot. He's QB 25 in points per game. They ran the ball a lot because they have an awesome defense. Now, I do think that just the way that defenses go year over year, if they take even a small step back, I could see them passing more on offense. The wide receivers are good. JSN is elite. So I think Darnold, I think we could see him take a slight step forward, but he's just somebody that was preferably your QB3 that you could make your QB2. Never going to be a guy that I think has that high of a ceiling, but he's startable every single season, and he does have a contract and also won the Super Bowl. So that gives you some clout there. And the last guy that is not about to be discussed is Kyler Murray, a guy who's always good in fantasy for the most part, has a pretty high ceiling. It's just injuries. We'll see if the Kyler Murray play style and Kevin O'Connell offense will meld well because he's got good receivers there. So if Kyler is going to be hardworking, which I feel like he's been known to not be the hardest worker just with film study, that he could have a really good year. It's just that there's still risk. I could still see a scenario where Kyler Murray's on another team next year and in a quarterback competition. So he has to take this opportunity now to establish himself long-term in Dynasty.
Yeah, Kyler definitely, if he gets that contract, he's probably going to move up a tier, especially if he proves he's healthy. He might move up more than a tier. 29, though, so not a ton of upside. But, boy, if he looks healthy with that offense, Kevin O'Connell, Justin Jefferson, all the other weapons around him, that could be a pretty big fantasy play there. Now, the interesting part, the last two players here caused a little bit of fun between Justin and I. A little peek under the hood. Typically, we just do this as a democracy. We're talking about a tier. We talk about players. If they get 2 votes, they're in the tier. JP happened to recommend this grouping as the tier for tier 7. I pushed for Stroud and probably Murray to go up a tier, Jones to go down a tier, maybe figure out if we just dissolve the tier. And Justin, being the CJ Stroud hater that he is, pushed back very hard. So we ended up making a little bet here, and I'll give my case for Stroud here in a second, but I just want to lay the foundation for the bet. I believe it was $10. Nothing huge. We're not ballers.
That's a lot of money for me.
Yeah, I believe me too, buddy. But we're just whoever's right. It's just straight fantasy points per game, 8-game minimum. Whoever's right, we're making a little donation to Fantasy Cares. Maybe we'll do a few more of these throughout the season if we get a couple other disagreements. Just love to raise some money for a good cause when we can, even if it's not a ton. But look, for Stroud, this was his worst season of his career, and I know Kyler is kind of the outlier in this, but you're looking around, these other guys, like Sam Darnold did not outscore him in points per game. That was Sam Darnold's second best game of his career, or second best season of his career. Best season was 2 years ago in Minnesota where Kyler's at. But Sam Darnold's offensive situation, if anything, got worse this year, right? He lost his RB1, he lost his offensive coordinator. I know they added some things around him. And then Daniel Jones, man, he has just been a terrible quarterback his entire career. He's coming off an Achilles injury. We were counting on him for some rushing ability. I just don't think you can count on that with the Achilles. CJ Stroud, look, I know our memory of him is terrible. Justin, you shared that thumbnail of I snuck into an NFL game and they let me play quarterback or whatever that joke was going around. It's a funny joke. It was. He played horribly in the playoffs. But you also take the full season into context. He had some of the worst injury luck at running back, wide receiver, offensive line. Everything around him was just crumbling. His running game was non-existent, basically. They were hoping Joe Mixon was going to be their RB1. He doesn't play a single snap, so they slap a little Flex Seal tape on it, and they got Woody Marks trying to carry the load, and he's clearly not fit for that. Your play-action game is non-existent. Your offensive line can't hold up. Your receivers are getting banged up. It was just a tough draw for him last year, and he's still one of the highest producers on this graphic, if not the highest producer on this graphic. I know Daniel Jones, higher points per game, injury. I get that. But that's the big thing is that Achilles, and he's older. The Colts wide receiver room is a little banged up right now. I just don't see a world where Daniel Jones outscores CJ Stroud if they're both healthy. I just don't see it.
I don't see a world where CJ Stroud outscores Daniel Jones, even if Daniel Jones is 70%. I'm going to be honest. The guy's not. I think he's a okay quarterback. I think he's a slightly above average NFL quarterback. I don't think he's a good fantasy quarterback. His QB 8 overall rookie year season, he only had 23 passing touchdowns. I'm seeing here. He had 4,000 yards. That helped get him there. But I don't think he has any ceiling. I think QB 15 in a normal season is kind of his ceiling. I'll be honest. That year that he was there, that year that he was up there in points per game, he would not have been a QB1 last year. His points per game would not have been a QB1 this past season. So he was a QB1 as a rookie. It was a horrible scoring year. So he's never been a real, meaningful difference-making QB1. Like, he's been a QB1 once and it didn't matter. Otherwise, he's been QB 20 or lower. And I'm just not interested in a guy who's been QB 20 or lower. And I think will continue to be in that rough range. And I think the bull case for him is moving up to around QB 15, which still barely matters. Because honestly, the difference between 16.8 and 17.8 points per game, if you want to talk about the difference between Darnold and Stroud last year, practically irrelevant. When you're down in that low of a range, you're just not doing much. And if I can get him for a early second type of valuation, but people still want like roughly like a first for him. I can't imagine a world in which I want to buy him. And just talking on Daniel Jones, I just made the bet on Daniel Jones because I think he was your least favorite player in this tier. I was happy to make it on any of them. David, if you told me CJ Stroud just has to outscore any one of these three guys, I would have taken that. So you were stupid to not try to push for a more risky bet. I just think, although I do have to admit, Darnold scares me just because the defense is that good, which is, again, another reason I'm scared about Stroud. Phenomenal defense. They are not going to need him to do anything. And that is going to cap his fantasy ceiling. So for that reason, I'm glad I didn't take the bet on Darnold because it's a similar situation, phenomenal defense. But Murray and Jones, I expect both of them to outscore him unless Jones comes in absolutely like worst case scenario with his Achilles, which everything seems to be trending the right way. So I feel very confident in this, and I can't wait for you to pay up to charity, David.
So we got to remember Daniel Jones, guys. So that crappy rookie season that you talked about for CJ Stroud, where he played 15 games, he scored more than Daniel Jones' highest scoring season, where Daniel Jones played 16 games. Daniel Jones, this is a guy we're talking about. Quarterback 25, quarterback 24, quarterback 27, quarterback 9, quarterback 44, quarterback 9, quarterback 17. He is not a good NFL quarterback. He's coming off an Achilles injury, and we count on him for rushing. I just can't. I'm out, man. I have him on one team where he's my quarterback 3. That's fine. I just don't think he's not a good quarterback, and he's coming off an Achilles injury. That's not a good combination.
I don't think he's that bad of a quarterback. I do think there's something to be said about people in horrible situations, and the Giants, absolute horrible situation. Darnold, Baker, right? We have these tiers littered with guys who sucked in certain places and are able to come back and do something different. I think we saw a meaningful enough sample size last year of him being good enough there. They have a coach that knows how to use him. They signed him. They have some weapons there. Alec Pierce, I don't think is a phenomenal wide receiver, but he's a phenomenal NFL wide receiver. You need that guy in an offense. And then they have Warren. Warren is a phenomenal wide receiver, even though he's a tight end. So I think they have enough there to build around that they're going to have an offense that's going to be in the red zone. They're going to score touchdowns, and he's going to be QB 14 probably, which is a lot higher than QB 22 than is CJ Stroud's. You can lock it in, finish. JP, anything to comment?
Yeah, I think you guys pretty much beat that one. I don't know. There's a whole lot more I can add to the projections for those guys. I like Jones just a touch more, but I think Stroud long term, I would take him every time over Daniel Jones. But just this next couple of years, I think I do Daniel Jones a little bit more.
Then we have the cash price here as a 1-2 swap for these guys. None of these guys are really worth a 27 first. I think some of these guys are worth a 28 first, right? I think Ty Simpson, if you know it's not an early 28 first, it's a playoff 28 first. If you know, which it's hard to know, so don't sell a 28 first for Ty Simpson. But it just, the valuation of the 27 first, I think, is why we have the 1-2 swap here, right? If it was a 26 first, these guys are worth a late 26 first, right? It's a different value system when we're talking about it than we might have in other times in the past. Tier up a playoff second, 27 second again, not a 26 second, because then that's a third. And then positional pivots, DeAndre Swift type, Parker Washington, Kenyon Sadiq. Again, I'm not a big Parker Washington fan, so I wouldn't pivot to him, but I would look on keep trade cut in that range of wide receiver. Terry McLaurin, maybe, right? Somebody who's a 8th, 9th round wide receiver, because these are 8th, 9th-ish round quarterbacks. Those are your pivot type of options. And we have one last tier here, and that's going to be a 3-man one. It is not a big tier. It's going to be Matt Stafford, Bryce Young, Malik Willis. And then anyone after this, just honorable mentions.
Dude, back to back on Keep Trade Cut is Parker Washington and Casey Concepcion. Wow. Sorry. That just kind of caught me by surprise. That's shocking. Yeah. Bryce Young in this tier, I think that there are some similarities to him and Stroud as fantasy quarterbacks, but I actually think Stroud could be a long-term quarterback. Bryce Young, I feel like he could lose his job this year if they win 5 or 6 games. I feel like just at any moment, Bryce Young could be out the door because he's clearly not a guy who lifts the ceiling of an offense. He's small. You have to work around just his deficiencies in that department. He's not going to be a guy who's going to create a whole lot when somebody's in his face, just in general. So I think it's more so just we're a little bit lower on him in general, and he's never really been a difference-making fantasy option at any point. Stafford is the opposite of that. He was a difference-making fantasy option just last year. QB1 in points per game. Also a player that I could see out of the league in a year or two. Malik Willis, I could say the same about him. I think that's what this tier is. It's a whole lot. Bryce Young has more long-term upside to be a 6-year starter, maybe if he surprises us. But yeah, I think all of them are not starters in 2028.
I more or less agree with that, and that's why we have them here. I just want to ask, are we as a podcast and we as just in general, the fantasy football community, writing off Malik Willis too much? Does he actually have a chance to run with this? He doesn't seem set up to success. The wide receiver room, I got a call. They want me to come try out. Not inspiring, right? He has a running back to throw to, and then that's it. Is he worth buying at a mid-second-ish price point if you're not paying a second necessarily, if you're paying a player? Should we be trying to get him if we can cheap? Does he have that ability to round in? He was a elite prospect to some people and then got drafted in the 3rd, right? He was going to be the 103, the 104, it's the 30 something or 3 something. But just curious what your guys' thoughts are on the upside and if it's worth any buying it on.
I'll keep mine short here and then I'll let you go, David. I think if you're talking about a mid-second, even if he's just a 1-year option that is back in QB1, it's not that bad of a scenario. And if there's more long-term, then you're winning.
Yeah, the Dolphins are terrible. They're going to be in position to take a good quarterback. It's probably going to happen. So if you know what you're buying, which is 1 year of a high upside rushing fantasy quarterback with low upside on the passing side. So if he's healthy, we're still probably looking at mid QB2 at worst, I would say. That's pretty good. If we're looking at Matt Stafford, is he going to play next year? Same price. We don't know. The other good thing about Willis is even if the Dolphins draft Arch Manning, there's 2 possible outcomes where A, they want to sit Arch so you can start Malik Willis again next year for at least some of the season. Or B, they're going to start their guy and they decide Willis was good enough. Somebody else wants to give him a little something to bring Willis in for competition. So, yeah, I don't think just because the Dolphins are terrible and almost certainly going to draft a quarterback in the first round of next year's draft, that means Willis won't be starting after this year. It's just a much tougher path for him.
David, I think you're going to be happy to hear this. I just on the JP mentioned Bryce Young, Stroud. There's some similarities there, right? But I did turn down Bryce Young and AJ Barner for CJ Stroud in the league. So I like him more than somebody. You should be happy.
Surprising. I don't care if you're wrong. You're allowed to be wrong.
Stafford is a phenomenal offensive, just force. I also great contender buy if you can get him cheap, but what is cheap enough really, right? So if we look at our cash price page here, we have that price as an early second. If that's a truly early 27 second, that's hard to give up for Stafford. I could see a world where I have Ty Simpson that maybe I'll consider doing it because I feel some sort of like I've got quarterback figured out for 10 years if I have both of them. 10 years might be an exaggeration because we need to see Simpson actually do something, but you can tell yourself that story. What are you actually willing to the 2-0 what in next year's draft class for Stafford if you're contending you need quarterback?
I think like one of the teams that's not clearly tanking for Jeremiah, but still probably not a playoff team.
So like maybe
203?
Yeah, somewhere in there.
JP, what's your answer?
I'd rather buy Dak is my answer because I feel like I can get maybe 5 years for a late first or something, or for late first and something. I struggle to pay like a 201, 202, or 3 for any of these guys. I think it's more my sell price. But if I feel like it's the ceiling on the pick is like 204, then I think I could do that. If it's 204 to 207, we're kind of type of range.
I would just like to point out that you set this price.
I did. I should have put early to mid. I think would have been probably the best bet.
Then looking up at tearing up, that's going to be about a 2-3 swap roughly. Positional pivots, a Denzel Boston, Jonathan Brooks, George Kittle type. So that kind of ties up our tiers here. We'll have the actual tiers in the episode description, a list for you guys. We do have some honorable mentions, of course. If we didn't talk about them, they're an honorable mention. Honestly, like names we're interested in, because we have a lot of players here, right? We're interested in Shador / Deshaun Watson / Geno Smith / Aaron Rodgers. We're not interested in paying anything for any of these guys, right? Cousins, yeah. Anyone who can start.
Probably.
McCarthy.
Penix probably the most interesting off the list. Yeah, McCarthy's interesting.
And then
you guys got any good candidates for? I was gonna say, you got any good candidates for the next in the Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield trend? Mac Jones.
JP, would you like to say Anthony Richardson?
I was gonna say, can you guys guess mine? And thank you, you did it.
My advice, this was last season with Anthony Richardson, was he's gonna hit waivers, and he has hit waivers. And I picked up some Anthony Richardson, so I have my first Anthony Richardson shares. Get him off waivers, don't pay for him. So yeah, it's just any quarterback on a 52 is our theory. We'll say this is kind of a Scott Connor phrase, like the NERB on a 52, any quarterback on a 52. But the principle behind it, just take them if they have a chance of starting, because when they start, you can maybe get a second for them, right? Or at least a third. So those are our quarterback tiers. Anything else to add to it, guys? All right. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Dyno Construction Podcast. We hope you found this as helpful for you as it was for us. Please remember to like and subscribe wherever you listen or view. And from all of us here at the Dyno Construction Podcast, until next time.